It is Friday, July 21st, 5 p.m. in Washington, D.C. I'm Manila Chan. You're watching RT America. So Israel's prime minister is unhappy with the ceasefire in southern Syria that the U.S., Russia, and Jordan managed to achieve during the G20 summit. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thinks it'll jeopardize Israel's national security and empower Iran. In the meantime, Moscow responded by saying it'll take Israel's concerns into account. RT's Alexei Yarshevsky has the report.
During the G20 summit 2 weeks ago, when Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin met face-to-face for the first time, a major shift in Middle Eastern politics took place. The two presidents, along with Jordan, agreed on a ceasefire in southern Syria, which has been seen by many analysts as a major move to make the much-coveted de-escalation zones work. Russia has often said that those would be the only way to bring the Syrian crisis to a peaceful solution. But the de-escalation zones in that part of the country did not really work, with U.S. coalition performing numerous airstrikes on pro-government militias in At-Tanf area in May and June. Trump took to Twitter later to underline the importance of the deal, saying it saved lives. And indeed, it represented the first time in months that the United States and Russia agreed on something regarding Syria. But not everyone seems to be happy with this development. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu first expressed skepticism at the idea, but last Sunday, having met with French President Macron in Paris, went even further and said Tel Aviv was utterly opposed to the deal. Israel's defense minister was even tougher on this, saying Israel reserved its complete freedom of action, regardless of any understandings of developments, and retaining exclusive responsibility for the security of Israel's citizens. Therefore, the freedom of action was absolute, and Israel would do everything that is needed. End of quote. Netanyahu's office later issued a statement as well, saying that he spoke to Rex Tillerson and Sergei Lavrov. Both told him that Israel's demands would be taken into account, something Russia later said also will be done. And while Israel generally welcomes a cessation of hostilities in the country, Netanyahu said his land would strongly uphold red lines, which are, according to Israeli leader, would be keeping Iran and Hezbollah away from Israel's Golan border, preventing the establishment of an Iranian military presence in Syria as a whole, and also blocking any attempt by Hezbollah to acquire precision weapons. Given long-standing animosities between Israel and the mentioned party, such concerns could be understandable. But former IDF analyst Shemuel Meyer argues that Israel should be accepting this U.S.-Russia partnership in resolving the war in Syria, particularly because of the contested Golan Heights issue, something which has been a thorn in Tel Aviv's side and was also the side of Damascus for years. He believes such partnership would rehabilitate UN contingent in the Heights, and that would also serve as a solution to a serious issue bothering Israel, which is who would monitor the de-escalation zone along the Israeli-Syrian border. All this adds to the already complicated situation in the region, but Moscow has responded to criticism from Netanyahu, saying that it would do everything it can to take Tel Aviv's concerns into account. Alexei Yarshevsky, RT, reporting from Washington, D.C.
To discuss this, I was joined earlier by Miko Peled. He's a former IDF soldier turned human rights activist and author of this book, The General's Son. I started by asking him about his reaction to Netanyahu's demands.
Has been a menace to the international community, and they've been an obstacle to peace for a very long time in the region. So Netanyahu's rejection of any peace plan really shouldn't come as any surprise. Israel still holds the Golan Heights, which it occupied 50 years ago. So it's understandable that they would not want any kind of stability in the area, because a stable Syria would bring back the issue of the fact that Israel has occupied the Golan Heights. So I don't think there could have been a peace deal that Israel would have accepted. I don't think it's about the specific details. I think it's the concept of a stable, quiet, peaceful Syria that Netanyahu does not want to see.
So you think no matter what the different factions inside Syria right now, whether it's the Western allies or the Syrian allies, no matter what they present, it'll always be something Israel will reject?
Absolutely. Israel will reject any possibility of a peaceful, stable Syria. There's no question about that. It doesn't benefit them because the chaos benefits Israel. As soon as there's quiet, they're going to start demanding, looking at Israel. And then they see that it's, like I said, it's been occupying the Golan Heights for 50 years. There are 2 million people in Gaza starving and dying of thirst and no electricity in this terrible heat. Israel has got a whole Pandora's box of issues that it wants the world not to, to look away from.
We now know that Israel is involved, particularly regarding supporting jihadist groups like al-Nusra.
Israel is involved, I think, and has been involved in every place where there's been conflict in the countries that surround Israel. We know that Israeli planes Israeli Air Force has been involved in bombing targets in Syria. And there has been evidence of Israeli collusion with all sorts of groups that are part of the chaos in Syria. And Israel doesn't need anybody to tell. The Israeli government doesn't need anybody to tell them whether or not they have a right to say. They say what they think, and because they are strong and because they have a very powerful influence here in the United States in the form of the Israeli lobby and similar lobbies in Europe, they get a seat at the table every time.
Now, Netanyahu has come out and condemned Bashar al-Assad on several moral grounds. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but don't you find it kind of funny, like the pot calling the kettle black? Well,
you took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. The accusation by Netanyahu that anybody else is a terrorist, if it wasn't so tragic, then it would be funny. Thousands of political prisoners held by Israel. Again, 2 million people in this horrifying heat without water or electricity in the Gaza Strip. Chaos in Jerusalem where the freedom of religion is being denied to hundreds of thousands, well, millions of Muslims who want to go and pray in Al-Aqsa. And on and on and on. So for Netanyahu or any Israeli prime minister to accuse anybody else of terrorism is really ridiculous. It's just that the Israeli terrorism comes in the form of an army that is a regular army and uniforms and generals, and they're not scrappy like some other terrorist organizations. But it is a terrorist organization, just very well funded.
And Israel has also been in the news lately for ongoing clashes right now, especially like you were just talking about Palestinians in Jerusalem, the West Bank. Netanyahu also said that the European Union was, quote, crazy for not accepting Israel's policies, including the occupation and the settlements. What does this mean for the prospects of a one-state solution, and given the current, the now 6 months in U.S. presidency of President Trump?
Well, Trump, in a way, has emboldened the extreme-most elements within the Netanyahu regime, which is very interesting because now it's...
I find it interesting that you call it the Netanyahu regime, because you don't hear too many people.
Well, he's been prime minister for a very long time, and he's got a group of people around him that are characteristic of his policies, and they have been emboldened in a way that now they no longer talk about peace, they no longer talk about two-state solution. They say it's all Israel, it's to the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, forcing the conversation to be not about a peace with Israel, but about a single state, which will either be an apartheid state, as I believe it already is, or a real democracy, and that is a conversation that needs to be had. The talks about the two states and the peace with Israel has always been, has led to nothing. And so in a way, Trump administration, and policy towards Israel, or lack thereof, lack of policy towards Israel-Palestine has emboldened them and is forcing, I think, a very important conversation, whether we are accepting an apartheid regime in all of Palestine or we are going to strive for a democracy. It
doesn't sound like the U.S. is going to be reining in Israel
Not anytime soon.
Miko Peled, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Miko Peled, Israeli peace activist and author of The General's Son. A 17-year-old boy has reportedly been killed in fresh clashes that erupted between Israeli police and Muslim protesters on the so-called Day of Rage. The Palestinian spiritual leader had warned the Israeli government of the potential for an explosive situation. Our Middle East correspondent Paula Sleer has the latest on what's happening right now on the ground in Jerusalem.
It comes as a week of protests over the Israeli increased security measures around Al-Aqsa are taking place. If you remember last Friday, there were 2 Israeli security officers who were killed, and Israel responded by closing off many of the entrances to Al-Aqsa. Today, they stopped men until the age of 50 from entering to pray. They also stopped buses that were making their way from across Israel with Israeli Arabs who were hoping to go to Al-Aqsa and show their defiance. Now, it wasn't just a day of prayer today, Friday. It was also also the main day of rage. It was called for by the spiritual leader of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and he said that it should be a day of hate and protest, that people should abandon their regular mosques and come and pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but not actually go into the mosques. Instead, stand outside where the metal detectors that Israel has put into place in the last few days to try and beef up security are now present. He said, to quote, otherwise the situation would explode. I was caught in some of those clashes, and there are neighborhoods in East Jerusalem that look almost like a war zone. You have Israeli security officers charging forward with rubber bullets and tear gas, and also a machine that sprays liquid, dirty liquid on people. The protesters surge in the opposite direction, and they have huge rocks and stones that they've been throwing at the security forces. Now, all of this comes as the Israeli cabinet held an emergency meeting. They decided to keep these metal detectors in place. They believe it's for security, but of course the Muslim worshippers believe that it is a way for Israel to change the status quo of the Temple Mount, which is a hugely volatile and important religious site that currently has custodianship by Jordan. The clashes are ongoing, and we do expect the situation to remain extremely tense.